Welcome back, my friends, to Shoot First, Ask Questions Later. I know it's been a little bit over a month as I took a little bit of a family vacation, but we are back. And with an exciting episode with Rabbi Tzvi Benoff, we're going to be talking about the concept of Ona'as Mamon. We're going to be talking about what does it mean for Jewish price and economic regulation, and particularly through an interesting lens presented by the Shevet HeLevi, which I think this is the first time we're going to be focusing on the Tshuva Shevet HeLevi on the podcast. So I'm always excited when we do Dine Mamnus, when we do financial matters on the podcast, because usually we stick to Orach Chaim or interesting Evan Ezer scandalous questions or Yoredea, but it's always exciting when we kind of get more financial over here because I don't understand it. But our guest, Rabbi Tzvi Benoff, understands these things. He's originally from Bergenfield, New Jersey, is the assistant rabbi at the Riverdale Jewish Center, and member of the Wexner Kollel Elyon Kollel Lehora at REITs. He graduated from Yeshiva College with a bachelor's degree in quantitative economics and history, before which he studied for 2 years in Eretz Yisrael at Yeshiva Keren B'Yavne. He also holds an MA in International Political Economy from Fordham University. And if there's something I'm noticing, a theme in your bio, is that the word economics and economy comes up more than once. So when I bring people on the podcast, I don't want to just stam bring a Talmud Chacham to stam teach a tshuva, but I like to bring a Talmud Chacham who has a particular expertise in the matter, and I think we're in for a treat with Rabbi Benoff. So without any further ado, maybe before we jump into who the Shevet HeLevi was, what's the nature of the Sefer, what's the nature of his Chiddush, maybe just give us a very brief overview of the concept of Ona'as Mamon and anything else we should know before we dive into the particulars.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rabbi Kurtz. It's a pleasure and honor to be on the podcast. In terms of Ona'ah, so Ona'ah, if we would translate it literally, it means to oppress. And oppressing can mean different things. You can oppress people in different ways. And when we typically use the word oppress, the connotation seems to be emotional harm or psychological harm, but there can be oppression in many different ways. There can be economic oppression, there could be verbal oppression. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the Torah uses such a general term. The Torah in several places brings up the Isser, the prohibition of Onah, and in different contexts, it means different things. You have a concept of Ona'as Mamon, oppressing people with money, which is what we'll be focusing on primarily today. But then there's also a concept of Ona'as Dvarim, which again can mean different things depending on who exactly you hold like and how exactly you explain certain psukim and halachos in Chazal. But it seems to be a type of verbal abuse, to put it very generally. And it's not a coincidence that the same word is used. In fact, it might even be the same lav, depending on how you count, mitzvahs and things like that, or it may at least be connected. That's not just a conceptual, interesting concept to think about, but it actually kind of drills down to what the core, I guess, problem or core issue with Ona is. Meaning, if it's talking about something that's more of a psychological abuse of another person, then in some cases, an action might be permitted, and in some cases, it might be prohibited. Meaning, the onus or the I guess you could say the problem is not with the action per se, but of the consequences of your action.
Right. This is a huge question. I know Rabbi Blythe. I mean, he's written on everything, but one of the everything that he has written on is Ona'as Dvarim, and I think his theory is that it's not about you saying something malicious. It's about you demonstrating that that person is less than, that they're not important enough to you. So that can mean, harming them emotionally, or it can mean maybe ripping them off financially. And I think maybe if you just define for our listeners, I think there's different kinds of ways to oppress someone monetarily. We know there's a separate isser, there's a separate prohibition to charge a fellow Jew ribis, interest. That's certainly a way of oppression also because it keeps someone taking out more debt, and they can never become financially stable. So what precisely is Ona'as Mamon?
Yeah, so if we, I guess the term would be asymmetry or knowledge asymmetry about the market. So that means that you know something that the other person doesn't about the product. So in economics, we have a term called the market. So that is, it doesn't have to be in a physical place, doesn't have to be like the stock market has a building, it
I
doesn't
say
have,
we're recording this at the time that was it the Dow just went down like 1,000 points yesterday.
yeah.
Quite a time to be recording about the economy and the market in general.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. So the market doesn't necessarily have to be a physical place, but it refers to an abstract concept of the collection of buyers and sellers of a particular commodity. So if you would take all of those buyers and all of those sellers, and you talk to them, how much would you be willing to pay for something? How much would you be willing to sell something for? And you polled enough people, you would arrive at a particular number, either a specific figure or a range, and that'll be important for our discussion a little bit later.
so there's no
Uh,
such thing as necessarily objective worth, but it's what's the consensus of potential buyers of the product.
Yes, because any object doesn't really have any inherent worth. It's whatever people are willing to pay for it. So the
Mhm.
classic mashal that the Chafetz Chaim gives is, somebody goes on a long journey to get diamonds in a place that has diamonds literally for asphalt, for paving their streets. And there they use chicken stock. They use chicken schmaltz for currency. So he stocks up on that. And when he comes back, the whole thing has his whole supply of chicken schmaltz has spoiled, and he has nothing because nobody in Europe uses chicken schmaltz for currency. So different things are worth different amounts to different people in different contexts.
Mhm.
So when we're talking about Ona'a, what that means is that there is ostensibly a set market, a price that people are willing to sell or buy an object for. And ona means that you know something about either the market or this particular object that the other person doesn't. So the classic case, I guess, that people talk about is where the seller knows something that the buyer doesn't. And so the buyer overcharges the seller to make it easy, more than a sixth. So if the buyer charges the seller more than a sixth for some reason, wants to make more money, so they have transgressed the biblical prohibition, and the sale is null and void. Everything has to be returned.
Right. This is what we
Uh,
call a mekach, that the sale is void. It never took place because it was under false pretenses.
Exactly, yes. And the opposite, though less common, is also true. Let's say the seller unwittingly undersells the object or undersells the commodity for less than a sixth of its for cheaper than a sixth of its actual worth. And the buyer actually knows something that the seller doesn't. The same thing is true. So this is not just talking about the buyer trying to take advantage. It could also be the seller trying to take advantage. Either way, if one person knows that either this particular object is worth more or less, or the general market is worth more or less than what the price is, that is a problem of ona. Now,
So what if I'm aware that I'm being ripped off? What if I'm aware that he's overcharging me? Would that still constitute Ona'as Mamon?
right, so here we come to the crux of, or one of the crux of the issues, which is that if we're talking about an action, right? So stealing means taking something that doesn't belong to me. So that is, in a sense, objective. It either belongs to me or it doesn't. And so, it doesn't matter whether the other person technically knows or not. I mean, you could factor in mechila, but
Mhm.
the person doesn't know, and it doesn't matter whether the person knows or not. But when it comes to oh no, where the issue is abuse, so then that actually might not be a problem then if everybody's sort of on the same page. So there's a whole machlokas, there's a whole debate amongst the Rishonim, how how much on the same page everybody has to be in order for there not to be an issue. Everybody agrees that if everybody spells out, I don't care that I'm either overpaying or underpaying for this object, it's okay. The question is, how explicit do you have to be? That is a big machlokas.
Right. In monetary law in halacha, we say T'nai Mamon Kayim, that you're allowed to make stipulations as long as both parties are fully aware and fully consenting based on their awareness. The interesting thing is sometimes, we talk about um, Shemitah and how you have to annul all the different loans that are out there, or we talk about ribis. And even though, yes, it's all about money, it's about Shemitas Ksafim, and it's about not charging interest, and it's regulating our finances, there is also an Isser Veheter dimension to it. There's an additional halachic element that's being violated that can't just be forgiven by virtue of both parties consenting to it. So I wonder if there's an element of that here, or is Ona'as Mamon a purely financial issue?
Right. So it's a good question, and it's in the section of Shulchan Aruch of Choshen Mishpat. So I would say it leans more towards the Choshen Mishpat side, where T'nai Sheba Mamon Kayim, and I think that is part of the I think that is part of the rationale for people that have a more expansive view of how little of a condition you need to actually spell out, as long as you just say, "Oh, I'm okay with this." But there are others that say no, that you really need to spell out, I know this is worth this, and I'm actually paying this, and I know that there's an Isser of Ona, and we don't care for whatever reason. Um,
Okay,
okay.
so this sounds like a good overview. Before we get to the Shevet HeLevi, are there any other essentials we should know, or ready to jump into that?
I don't think there's anything in terms of Ona specifically, but I think just in terms of understanding the difference between, I guess we would say contemporary markets and markets in the times of Chazal or
Right,
the
they couldn't go onto their like Fidelity account, or they couldn't, just Google and see how a stock price is doing. So yeah, how did they even ascertain that back then?
exactly. So that's a good question, and we don't really know the answer. We don't, unfortunately, we don't. Our historical records aren't that good. But especially in large towns or large cities, there were markets. There was a large physical space at that time where people would congregate, or spaces where people would congregate from nearby towns. Everybody would take their produce, everybody would take their goods, and they would set up shop and start selling things. And so. Uh, you might not know the price that another town was selling things for, but everybody in the same town would know what all the other vendors were charging and what all the other people were paying for it, just by simply just walking around and asking.
Hmm.
And if you didn't, then maybe you could say you don't care, meaning if you don't do your research, then that shows that you actually don't care if you overpay or underpay for the object.
Yeah, it reminds me when we went to Eretz Yisrael a little over a year ago, before everything obviously went pretty awry, to put it mildly. We were going up and down Ben Yehuda trying to get yarmulkes for family members, and we went to one stand which like charges 300 shkalim, and the other one said, "Oh, I would have charged you 30 shkalim." And I'm like, and we tried going back to reverse it, and he's like, "It's a done deal." And I'm thinking to myself, "It's Ona'as Mamon." So I do also, just one last question before the Shevet HaLevi. Is there a difference between something which is a staple, like groceries, versus something which is a luxury item? And I go in knowing that I'm supposed to be paying a premium, and it's not something that I essentially need, and I'm willing to pay a lot of money, and I'm not really focused on what the particulars of the price are. I just throw my dollar bills at them, as it were.
Yeah, so the Shevet HaLevi will bring up that, and you could say that that's part of Ona. I think if you look in the Gemara, both from that the Shulchan Aruch quotes as well as other Gemaras, um, we have two different terms. We have price regulation, and then we have Ona. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. Ona means that there is a market rate which you are overcharging. Um, Price gouging or price controls means that we're artificially stepping in to say that nobody can charge more than a certain amount. We have examples of that. So, for example, the Gemara in Sukkah talks about how around Sukkah's time, if there was a bad crop or just because of some adverse weather conditions, Hadassim or Lulavim or Esrogim might be really, really expensive, and we don't want price gouging because the supply is so low and the demand is so high. So Chazal would step in and regulate the market.
Right. If I remember, what they would threaten the merchant saying, "We will paskin like a more makel shita that you don't need a complete hadas in order to be yotze the mitzvah." In order to threaten them into selling them at more reasonable prices. That's my recollection, which
Exactly.
is remarkable. Still, like Tosis and Rishon, their deal with that question, like, can you threaten a poskin like a shita that you don't believe in order to bring some sort of economic equity? It's a
Oh,
fascinating side question.
so absolutely, it is a fascinating question, but as you said, it may be a side question, meaning there could be that is a wonderful topic on its own about rabbinic price controlling. But if one of those merchants would charge more than what Chazal were recommending for that Hadas leaf, for that Hadas branch, that might not be a prohibition of Ona. It might just be that you're going in line with a very, very, very expensive market, which Chazal didn't want you to do.
Mm-hmm. So time flies when you're having fun learning Torah. Let's transition to the Shevet HeLevi. Maybe give our listeners very brief bullet points, what we need to know about the Shevet HeLevi, time period, yes, recent, I know, author, nature of the Sefer, and then let's get to his Chiddush on Ona'as Mamon.
Sure. So, Shevet HeLevi was written by Rav Shmuel HaLevi Vosner. He was a Ashkenazi Hasidic posek, or posek for the Hasidic world. Was born in 1913, died in 2015. So, Baruch Hashem lived a very, very long life. He was born in Vienna, studied in Chachmei Lublin of Poland by Rav Meir Shapiro. Eventually moved before the Holocaust to what was at that time mandatory Palestine. He learned in the Tushinsky Yeshiva, and then at a young age became a member of the Eda Charedis. Ultimately, the Chazon Ish encouraged him to relocate to Bnei Brak, where he was the Rav of one of the local communities there. And then as he continued to grow in fame and stature, he became one of the Gedolei Hadar, a major posek for the entire Jewish world, and in particular for the Hasidic community. That was because of his background in the Hasidic world. Many of his children are dayanim for various Hasidic communities as well. And he's most well known for his prolific responsa, his Shilos and Shuvas Shevet HeLevi, which cover a range of halachic shilas all across the four sections of Shulchan Aruch.
Right, it's written. No, it's really true. Anyone who reads contemporary halakhic literature, the footnotes are replete with references to the Tshuva Shevet HeLevi. He made remarkable contributions and an impact not just on the Hasidic Welt, but also on the broader Jewish world as well. So now with our understanding of his very impressive CV, and we didn't even get, I should say, resume. We didn't get through the whole CV certainly, but you gave us the essentials. What is his chiddush? What's his novel approach when it comes to Ona'as Mamon that's worth mention?
So his novel approach is, I guess we would say, what the definition of a market is. In Hebrew or Gemara language, the term is a shar, which literally means gate. The gate was where people sold their wares in the times of Chazal. And so the prohibition of Ona is to charge more than a sixth of that. There may be a prohibition to charge even less than that if you know that you're overcharging or undercharging. But regardless, the Shevet HeLevi's view of the shar is not what I would say the conventional one is of modern economics. In modern economics, the market value of an object is where supply and demand converge. So if in Economics 101, they have a graph where you have two lines, a supply curve and a demand curve. So put very simply, the more products there are in a market, the cheaper they are. If you have more baseball cards, then they're worth less. As supply goes up, the price goes down. As supply goes down, the price goes up. Then you have a competing force. You have demand, how much people want this object for. So the higher the demand for something, the more people are willing to pay for it, the price goes up. So you have two competing forces. You have supply and demand that are inversely related. And so those two curves or those two trends converge at a certain point, meaning there's a certain point in the market where the amount of stuff that there are and the amount that people are willing to pay sort of equal out. And wherever those two lines converge, that is the market value. If you charge more than that, you're overcharging from based on the market price. And if you go under that, then you're undercharging. So that's what I would say modern economists call the market for something.
Yeah.
Um, and I would say the vast majority of poskim also believe that,
Hmm.
that assuming that there is actually one point and not a range of what people are willing to pay and what people are willing to sell an object for, but assuming there actually is one point, at least in the abstract sense. So let's take, for example, milk. So the price of milk is $3. Why is it $3? Not because milk is inherently worth $3. It's because based on the amount of milk there is and the amount that milk is worth to people, everybody sort of implicitly realized that the way you can maximize the amount of sales and purchases is if the price of milk is at $3. If people would charge more, less people would buy. And if people would charge less, then people would overbuy and sellers would be losing potential money.
Right. So I think my American capitalist mind can't possibly conceive of any alternative. That seems to be Pashut the way things work. So what other framework could there possibly be?
So there are two other possibilities. One we already discussed, which is price regulations.
Right.
So in a regulated market, and we do have that a little bit in America, certain commodities are regulated where the government or trade bodies or monopolies basically say, we are in charge over here. We can enforce this, and we will only charge X amount of money.
Right, and this is very important when it comes to things like drugs, like medicine, essentials that people need to survive. There needs, I mean, okay, I guess I'm coming out with my own opinion. I think there needs to be economic regulation. Otherwise, people won't be able to afford medicine. So that's an area where they need to step in. If they need to step in on, EA selling video games for $70 a piece, I'd like them to, but I'm not sure if they will.
Right. So that's the second model of a market where it's just artificially pegged at a certain value because that's what the government says. Then there's a third option, which is what Rav Shmuel Vosner talks about,
Mhm.
which
I'm really
is
excited. You're really building up the suspense.
yeah. So it's fascinating, which is it's whatever the lowest possible value is to cover costs.
Hmm.
So let's say, milk, I said, let's say it costs $3. So in a standard capital-based capitalist economy, it's not inherently worth $3. That's just sort of the price where it sort of landed.
Right.
How much did the milk companies have to pay to produce this bottle of milk? Well, hopefully less than that, otherwise they'd be losing money. But I don't know. I don't know how much Golden Flow actually needs to shell out in order to produce a gallon of milk.
You're saying
Um,
you're saying according to his model, Ona'as Mamon is about not charging more than you're basically only allowed to make less than a six margin on top of your operational costs.
exactly.
But my question to that is, don't the operational costs aren't those also dictated by the market? Your labor and the raw products you have to buy. Doesn't everything eventually have to? We're kicking the can down the road, aren't we?
Correct. And Rich Posner acknowledges that. He does acknowledge that you are kicking the can down the road. And so each step would have that halacha of ona apply. So,
Interesting. Wow.
you have the raw ingredients, you have the logistics, you have the shipping. Now, again, Rich Posner also acknowledges that you have labor costs, you have salary costs, you have insurance costs. So all of those things are part of the cost of what you hope to recoup when you sell it. But in terms of pure profit, at each stage of the production or at each stage of selling this bottle of milk, the sellers can only make up to 1/6 of a profit.
Wow, that is fascinating. And I like what what's interesting, he writes in the Chuva over here. This is in the paragraph Dibor Maskal Vahashta on the bottom of the first page that you gave me. He says, Vahashi Ika Miuta Yariel Akim Sharotz Snai Kain Al Din Torah. Like there might be people like Rabbi Benoff who reads the Chuva of the Shevet HeLevi and says, "Oh, I want to regulate things based on the Din Torah, based on how the Shevet HeLevi explains it." But they can't do this because what's happening? Only Sadiqim are going to be ripped off by all the people who are not keeping to these standards. And then he writes, if that's the case, this only works if everyone either buys in willingly, which probably won't happen, or if there's some sort of top-down mechanism for regulating and ensuring that people keep to this standard and definition of what Ona'as Mamon is. Which I'll just give a little bit of a footnote. This reminds me a lot, not to go too far off on a tangent. The whole three vows, the Gimel Shuos, about how we're not supposed to come back to Eretz Yisrael, the Gemara says, and the Samareba goes on his whole entire thesis with that. And one of the arguments back in the Samareba about why we're allowed to go to Eretz Yisrael today and settle it is that, well, the other nations didn't keep to their end of the bargain. They didn't exactly treat us too well while we're in Gullus with the Holocaust and everything. So if they didn't keep to their end of the deal, we don't have to keep to our end of the deal about how Gullus operates. So there's a similar kind of idea here. These halachos only apply as long as everyone buys in. Everyone needs to keep to their end of the bargain.
Yeah, so Shmuel Vosner does acknowledge that that would just not be realistic today, and he says that the Gemara itself acknowledges that. The Gemara itself acknowledges that without rabbinic enforcement or communal buy-in, this type of model is not realistic, and so therefore, in this b'diavad type of contemporary scenario, you can charge whatever I would say the colloquial market price is, whatever everybody else is, but just to acknowledge that that is technically overcharging.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So I guess I'll ask two questions as we are coming close to our close. One is, if there's any other important insights from this Chuva you want to share, certainly share that with us. And another question I want to raise is a bit of a broader one, which you've already touched on. And I know this would require maybe an entire course or an entire dissertation, but what in your view is the Jewish perspective? I don't want to say the Jewish perspective, but what would you say are the range of Jewish perspectives, Rav Vosner in particular, on if Judaism believes in a free market economy? And nowadays, it's worked in the past. Should we be trying to use some sort of rabbinic mechanism of enforcement to ensure that prices are kept at a reasonable rate within the Jewish community? And I know this isn't precisely our case, but an example that I think they attempted in the Haredi community with some form of moderate success is to put a price cap on how much people should pay for smachos. How big, a bas mitzvah or however they do bas mitzvahs or a bar mitzvah should be. Maybe there should be some more top-down regulation because of the arms race of smachos and how much money you have to put in. Maybe a top-down approach is better, even though I know this seems to smack in the face of everything we believe in the American free market economy. I know I
Yeah,
just threw a lot at you right there. Feel
yeah,
free to touch on whichever point you want in our last few minutes.
so it's a very important question. But as you said, I think that's more of a market regulation question than an ONOA question.
Mm-hmm.
So as in a free market economy, we believe that competition and a competitive pricing system of if people are willing to pay more for it, you can and should be able to charge more for it. Even if you'll be making more of a profit, that is what stimulates an economy, gives people more of incentive to buy and to sell and to develop. That's how economies and civilizations grow. And in Rav Vosner's understanding of what the ideal Torah market was or should be, it would be a much slower economy.
Yeah.
It would be much, much slower. And I think that's why the vast majority of poskim disagree with that vision. They say that Rav Shmuel Vosner's primary proofs from the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch are talking about simply rabbinic regulation of certain commodities, of certain staples, so of bread and wine and oil, things that were used on a daily basis, as opposed to luxury goods, which people are willing to pay more for. And so therefore the profit margin could be much higher. You obviously can't rip people off. You can't overcharge whatever everybody else is charging. But if the entire civilization or the entire community is willing to pay 10 times the amount of what a type of perfume or a type of car is worth because it's considered a luxury item, that's not called Ona'ah. So I think the vast majority of poskim say that there is a range of what is considered to be the market, and if you go beyond that or below that, that's Ona'ah. Rav Usher Weiss has an even more expansive view. He says that the only time Ona'ah exists is in that second scenario I was talking about, where there actually is a government regulated price system. But nowadays, there wouldn't be any other type. There wouldn't be any Ona'ah unless you're lying or fraud. But then you have the actual Gemara that Rav Osner is quoting, which I think is still relevant, not in terms of Ona'ah, but in terms of Chazal stepping in to regulate prices for certain commodities or certain services, which are considered to be staples, which are considered to be essential for Jewish life or communal
Yeah,
life.
how do we regulate yeshiva day school tuition prices? That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, so there, that has nothing to do with Ona'ah. It might be within the same ethos of Ona'ah, but in
Right.
terms of Isser Veheter, that's not Ona'ah. That's just public policy, which I don't mean to diminish. I think that's very important, but people should recognize it for what it is. And what gives Chazal the power to do that is not Ona'ah per se, but it's Chazal's mandate to make sure that the Jewish community continues to function properly.
Yeah, and I want maybe this is a good note for us to conclude on. Maybe just I think your point's well taken that when we talk about halacha and we talk about things like Ona'as Mamon, there are specific parameters, there are dinim, there are minutia. But what would you say is the broader ethos, the broader philosophy that emerges from the concept of Ona'as Mamon? And maybe with that, we'll conclude.
It's a good question, and I think it goes back to how we started our discussion about the translation of the word ona, of oppressing. So oppressing doesn't necessarily mean that you're charging 6% or 7% or 8%. It means that there's a certain asymmetry. It means that you know something that they don't, or they know something that you don't, and because of that, there is inequality going on over here. There is price gouging or non-price gouging or underselling, and that is oppressive. But if people know, or if that's what everybody is doing, then that's not considered to be ona. And the broader ethos is the same thing, that a economy or individual settlers should not be oppressing people by suppressing details about objects or suppressing details about the market. Knowledge that is universal is integral for stimulating an economy, and in addition to stimulating the Jewish community.
Absolutely. So, Rabbi Benoff, I want to really thank you for sharing not only your Torah expertise, but your economic expertise as well. This is a real good example of the kind of Torah motto we try to do here on the podcast. And Shkoyach, Hashem should give you continued hatzlacha in your rabbanus, in your economics, and all the great things that you're doing for the Jewish people.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Shkoyach.